The question is that this House do now adjourn Amber Rudd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to set the scene, if I may, of a beautiful town on the southeast coast, Hastings. We have some very exciting new projects taking place in Hastings. We have a new gallery coming at the end of this year. We have a pier which has recently received Heritage Lottery money, so we're rebuilding that. We have a new business which has moved into Hastings in the past year, Saga, which is bringing with it 800 new jobs. I could go on and on about the amazing positive elements that are taking place in Hastings. However, we also have some major problems, and sadly, I would like to take the opportunity of a few minutes here to draw attention to those problems. There is the index of multiple deprivation. It is like a sin list for boroughs. It has 352 members, and we have fallen steadily, the bottom being the worst, down this list, until we recently find ourselves, sadly, at number 19th. There is poverty in the town, there is a lack of industry. And there is much debate within the town itself about what can be done to change that, how we can bring about the regeneration that we so desperately need. Everyone has different views, but one area everyone is united upon: transport. How can we improve transport, particularly the rail links to London, in order to stimulate the regeneration that we need? We feel cut off like an island. The roads compound the rail problem. It takes an hour and 50 minutes to York, an hour and 55 to Cardiff, and an hour and 45 to Hastings. Clearly absurd. Such a short distance takes such a long time. We've had no investment in our roads or in our rail during the last Labour government. We were shamefully neglected. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am encouraged by the government's speedy and affirmative action in respect of electrification on the Great Western Route and other railways in northwest of England, and I dare to hope that the government will deliver improvements for the people of Hastings as well. Why is the train service in Hastings quite so bad? Unfortunately, it's a historic situation. We were just let down when the new railway was built in the 1850s, as it was competing with the one for speed being built across to Brighton. We have problems with our tunnels, we have single lines in certain areas, and we are vulnerable to points failure and slow periods during the journey. We have electrification problems, so that 12 cars cannot go down south of Tunbridge. So how do we achieve the improvements that we so badly need? Well, I'm happy to say that currently Network Rail are working with South Eastern Trains on small improvements. There are incremental improvements taking place which will shave seconds, possibly minutes, off our journey time. We so hope that we won't forever be known as the Cinderella line. There are improvements actually taking place this year to assets such as the points and to rein back on some of the speed restrictions that we currently have. We did have horrific problems over the winter, obviously caused by the snow, but what my constituents really objected to was the lack of information, that they were kept waiting for hours and they just couldn't access the right information. Now, I am told that South East Trains and Network Rail are now working closely with National Rail, who provide that information. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am ambitious for my constituency. I want to get rid of this reputation of being at the end of the line. I want us to have a much, much better line in order to achieve this regeneration that we need. I don't just want these incremental increases. I want a first-class line so we can have this great leap forward that we need. We need a better quality of line, and we need that without enormous costs for the taxpayer. Now, the McNulty report, which came out recently, obviously leads the way. We were faced with a shocking statistic that our lines are over 40% more in cost than European ones. It points out the way to stop above inflation rises. It tells us about the reforms that can be instigated within our railway lines that can stop this constant rising of costs and deterioration of services. My constituents have had enough of these constant inflation-busting rises. McNulty stresses the value for money, and that's what we need and what we're not getting in Hastings. We need the reforms to stop these constant rises. I believe we need to be ambitious about our railway service. What we need is investment. There's no way, I understand, that we can get these changes without investment. Now, I am very aware of the situation that this government finds itself in with the terrible deficit that it is inherited. So where else can we look for the investment that we so desperately need? I believe that we should look to a longer franchise. Now, I have to say that those of us in Hastings found it very disappointing when the Secretary of State for Transport said there was likely to be a 3 to 6 year franchise after 2014. Remember, the McNulty report calls for longer franchises. He makes the point that it is quite simply good business sense. Sadly, we are told it is because of Thameslink. But why should we in Hastings, so urgently in need of regeneration, be subject to Thameslink? We feel like we are always the afterthought, the little sister to be hushed up in the corner. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I would really respectfully ask the Minister to stop ignoring us when it comes to deciding what the priority is for transport. We don't always want to be a consequence of what is going on in the Thameslink project. Let's have a longer franchise, at least in double digits, and then we can get some investment in our line. We can surely include some requirements for change to modify and adapt within the Thameslink requirements. I'm saying that we should be part of the consideration of Thameslink. The Thameslink can go ahead and we can have our franchise extended within a certain requirement for modifications if Thameslink requires it. But 3 to 6 year franchise, as suggested, is like treading water with a repeatedly shoddy line. We urge the Minister to consider not to have us let down like that and to reconsider. However, if the department proceeds with a shorter franchise, at the very least we would ask for them to focus on requiring an intermediary timetable change across the network for Hastings services to ensure that one of the existing trains per hour that serves Hastings converts to a fast one. My Rail Action Group and I, we had a meeting recently with South Eastern Trains to put this proposal to them, and they responded with bringing us the actual existing franchise to show that there was no room for manoeuvre from them. So if we are to have the same type of franchise, either a shorter one as a stopgap, which is not what we desire, but if it is to come, we would ask that it is less prescriptive so that we can at least have some fast trains a day. What we need, of course, from this investment is upgraded electrification and eventually double tracking. I would urge government to consider what can be done to help us achieve this. Perhaps when the new franchise comes along, there could be a matched funding purpose. I mean, there is High Speed 2 going on, 34 billion. Maybe we can have a small amount for us down in Hastings so that the new franchise, when it comes, can have some investment in order to encourage the upgrades that we so desperately need. I would also like to mention, if I may, European funding. It feels like this is an elusive rabbit that keeps on skipping across us in the picture. People talk to us about, have you tried European funding? What about 10T funding? But it seems to slip away whenever we try to reach out and see where it is, where the source is, who can guide us. So I'd be very grateful for guidance from the Minister on whether this is something we should be trying to get. So the franchise, I believe, should be longer but less prescriptive. I know the member for Tunbridge Wells has long campaigned for this and has experience quite recently on travelling this line, I believe at the front with the driver. So he has actually experienced this and is a supporter of these efforts that we are putting together for our longer franchise. A word, if I may, as well, about the Cannon Street to Hastings line. Every few years, it seems like we in Hastings have to fight once more to keep this service. Once more, we are being told, well, you may or may not get to keep it. It depends on Thameslink. Please, don't make us dependent on Thameslink. We need our Cannon Street service. We are an area which has some areas, we are in a town that has some areas of deprivation. I hate going on about the deprivation. I'd much rather extol the virtues of Hastings. But given that we have these problems, I must say that the commuters that take the Cannon Street line are very important to us because they are, of course, the higher earners. Sometimes people say, oh, well, don't you worry about Cannon Street. If they get to Blackfriars or St Paul's, they'll be absolutely fine. I don't agree with that. 80% of the passengers who arrive in Cannon Street make their way on foot. It is entirely different arriving in London Bridge or St Paul's. We need to keep that Cannon Street service and will campaign hard to do so. My honourable friend for Battle and Bexhill has asked me to add his voice as well, and he has said that the Cannon Street service is essential to both commuters and businesses in his constituency and should not be put under threat or in any way adversely affected by the Thames Link programme. Rail companies in East Sussex are already struggling to maintain a reasonable level of service due to poor investment in the track, signalling and rolling stock in the past. My constituents, he says to me, deserve a better deal, and I seek investment to improve rail travel to make it affordable, reliable and sustainable. He put it very well, and I feel he reinforces the arguments that I am making. My constituents, Madam Deputy Speaker, are patient, but we believe that we deserve better. We are ambitious for our town, for our regeneration. We have a rail action group, the St Leonard's and Hastings Rail Improvement Programme, known locally as SHRIMP. SHRIMP are not known for their militancy, but we hope to change that. We are going to be stepping it up to make our case, to make it clear that the rail links for Hastings are not incidental to our regeneration, and we don't want to be incidental to the Thames Link programme. I would ask the Minister to consider if he will help us in structuring a franchise to deliver a first-class line to a first-class town.
Yeah.
Mike Penning.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be responding to the adjournment debate this evening on behalf of the member for Hastings and Rye. In congratulating the Honourable Lady, can I also say that perhaps she's got a bit of the short end of the stick on this as well, in that, sadly, as the Duty Minister for Shipping and Roads, you haven't got the mechanic, you have the oily rag responding to the debate this evening, and I apologise on behalf of that, but this is what happens on a Friday, so perhaps in the ballots. She's been lucky but unlucky in many ways. And I'm sure the Minister of State will be more than happy to have a meeting with the Action Group and the honourable members that are responsible for this part of Kent to talk as we go forward. The briefing in front of me, Madam Deputy Speaker, says how wonderful it is to live in Sussex and that part of Kent. Can I honestly say, as someone who has fished on the beaches of Hastings on many occasions as a young man, it's a beautiful place to visit as well. And the tourist industry is very, very important to that part of the world. So it's not living there, it's how we actually make sure the economy grows. I'm aware very well of the social deprivation that is still hindering growth in that particular part of the country. As my honourable friend indicated during her comments, the history of the line goes back an awful long way, and actually the lack of investment that should have been put into the line many, many years ago was probably started right at the very start of the production, because the Hastings line, built in a bit of a hurry in the 1850s, was not built particularly well. It wasn't built as part of a network. It was a meandering from village to village line, which was a kind of the forgotten line when it was actually built itself. So while the Brighton line took a lot of the expenditure and a lot of the investment, even though there was the connections made in the 1850s, it wasn't particularly built well. And the line from Tunbridge to Hastings still today, built in the 1850s, it still causes real problems, and we're very aware of that in the department. I think the Honourable Lady shouldn't underestimate how powerful an argument she's been making, not only here, but on behalf of her constituents, and it's been heard loud and clear within the Department of Transport, and I suggest that if the campaign is being upped in its ante, that won't hurt at all either. The case is obvious, that there are real logistic problems, and that is affecting growth. But at the same time, as the Honourable Lady also alluded to, there are real problems with investment and the difficult financial situation that the government found itself in when it formed the coalition a year ago. And I know that very much the local residents and local MPs would like to not have the Thames Link involved in the discussions, but I'm afraid we have to, simply because the Thames Link, as a major piece of investment that the government have committed to, will have an effect on the incomes of whoever is running the franchise on this part of the world. And it would be very difficult, and I know the Secretary of State alluded to this in his statement, very difficult to go ahead with a long franchise without knowing the effects of what's going to happen with Thameslink and Crossrail. I think that would be foolish, and we've had too many franchises issued over the years which really haven't had the proper cost analysis and the evidence base around them. But we are very conscious as to the need for a sustainable franchise, a longer franchises, and the integrated Kent franchise, which the Honourable Lady was, I think, referring to, commonly known as the IKF. And until I started reading this brief last night, I had no idea what the IKF was, but I certainly do now. We will be looking at a shorter contract initially until the business case is formatted, and then issuing a much longer case once we have the business and the financial situation addressed once Thameslink is up and running through. I think many honourable members come to the House and say, well, we just want more money. And actually, I think it's excellent of the Honourable Lady to come to the House and say, we appreciate there is financial problems, but where can we get other money from? And certainly in my own portfolio, and I've had this discussion with the Honourable Member for Tunbridge Wells on more than one occasion, has to do with road funding, but actually match funding is actually very much the way forward. And I will take back to the Minister of State the ideas about match funding, and perhaps in the meeting that I'm sure the Honourable Lady will be seeking with the Minister of State, that actually discussions can be taken forward. I don't personally understand the consequences in transport terms, in rail terms, but I know it's an exciting way forward for us in roads in many, many ways. As we look carefully at the McNulty report, McNulty carefully looked at why our railways are so much more expensive than they are in Europe, and the Honourable Lady quite rightly alluded to the 40% more expensive. And we have to make sure that while we provide a 21st century service going forward, at the same time we take out some of these costs which are really squeezing the prices up so often as around the country and making it very difficult for commuters to go forward. Timetables, I know, are a real issue, and that's something we'll be looking at, not just in the shorter franchise that we'll be looking to be issued, but as we go forward. And there are understandable concerns to do with Cannon Street. It's kind of a historic battle that seems to be taking place. It sits here in the briefing in front of me. But I don't, according to what I see here, there should not be a carte blanche no to Cannon Street. I think that's something very much that needs to be discussed as we go forward. And that the local commuters and local MPs will very much be involved in that. Network Rail are committed to improvements. The Honourable Lady touched on some of the smaller improvements that are taking place now. That's an investment that is going forward, and I think it's important that those investments do go forward. And it will shave off some time, some limited times. But it won't shave off time, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we have the really difficult weather that we had recently over a Christmas period. And I fully take on board not only what the Honourable Member for Hastings and Rye has said in her contents, but others, that the communication between the rail operator and the commuters and the local community was not up to scratch, and the report that was commissioned by the Secretary of State actually said that. I think there is no way that the Department, nor the Secretary of State, nor I, or the Minister of State, feel that whether it was desirable or not, that anybody's going to be hushed up. The case is that the Honourable Lady is doing exactly what I would do and have done in the past on behalf of my own constituents on the East Coast main line, the West Coast main line. If I was doing it on the East Coast main line, I'd be somewhat out my constituency. That would be slightly difficult. And I think it's absolutely right and proper that these sorts of debates are not really about the technicalities of it, but raising the issues and raising the concerns of constituents. And I know the Honourable Lady will be doing that continuously as we go forward. I think that whole area around EU funding is going to be really difficult for me to address in this debate. If the Honourable Lady doesn't mind, I would arrange for the Minister of State to write to her so that we can address that properly. EU funding is always something, an anomaly to me. I see the amount of money that we contribute in, and I understand that when it comes back, it tends to go to areas of social deprivation and areas of need. Very interestingly, in the southeast, it's often perceived that there isn't areas that sort of need, and yet we all know there are. There are in my own constituency, and I know much more in the Honourable Ladies. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, in this adjournment debate this evening, we need to carefully, if we want, not just talk about how much we could spend and how easily it could be spent, because we don't have that sort of money. We have the obvious constraints around the Charing Cross, Cannon Street and London Bridge, where the London Bridge has had extensive works to go into it, but also the physical restraints on the line coming in and out, particularly around Guy's Hospital, major roads around the Strand, and not least that great river that flows past this great palace, which actually does restrict very much where and how we can bring trains and lines into London. There is an obvious alternative to an expansion of these stations, which is the investment that's going in, particularly with Transport for London and the Mayor in the Underground. And I think the Thames Link, even though I understand the concerns of the Honourable Lady, because the natural effect that she feels it's having on curtailing what could be done and how fast things can be done, I don't think she'll have to accept it is a major piece of infrastructure that London has been waiting for some considerable time. It's been talked about since I was a lad when I grew up in this great city, and I think the decision of the government to go ahead with that is a courageous decision, and I mean, it's obvious we know that it will have some knock-on effects, but it is not a complete block to other investments elsewhere, and it must, for the first time probably, lock in better services as they come into London, particularly from the south. Madam Deputy Speaker, the situation as we go forward with the debate is imperative that everybody is consulted, and we are, as a government, not about just having consultations for the sake of consultations, that actually the public feel engaged with them. I'm going through a detailed consultation at the moment to the future of the Coast Guard, and I'm sure at some stage going forward I'm going to be accused of doing a U-turn on it. But actually we said at the very start that if we believe in public consultations, we believe in the public being involved in consultations, then it's obvious that you're not going to be completely arrogant and come out the other end of it with identical processes of what you went in. And it is imperative, I think, that when the consultations on the future of the franchises and the services which will be there, that the public, and that means everybody involved with, from action groups to local MPs, to local authorities, and the commuters feel that they have engaged fully in the consultation and knowing where we go forward. I know the Honourable Lady referred to the Cinderella line. I must admit, when I read my brief last night, what's this Cinderella line? I mean, but it sits here inside my brief. It is not. I know a load of people feel this way, and they're not going to get any consolation from me saying it is not a Cinderella line. It is a line that has an historical inbuilt problem from the 1850s, and I know that we need to work forward. There are limited claims that we can all put on the limited funds that are available. But no matter what the schemes that go forward, the early franchise agreements, and even though it was a disappointment to the lady, have to be slightly shorter than we would like to have them been, so that it can be locked in with the other contracts and the other, particularly Thames Link, as we go forward. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's been important that this has been raised in the House this afternoon. I'm sorry it's so late on a Friday afternoon and everybody has disappeared, and I apologise to the Honourable Lady that the Minister of State, who is responsible for route, isn't here. Any points that she raised in her speech that I haven't covered in my comments so far will be responded to in writing, and I'm sure, as I said, the Minister of State will be more than happy to see the Honourable Lady and any of the other MPs and their delegations from her part of the world, and can I commend her for standing up for her constituents in the way she has this afternoon. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.